Continuing in chapter 4, God in the world. How do we actually do this? How do we practice this? How do we make it practical? Top of page 60. No, wait. Yes. Middle bottom of 65. There were a bunch of phrases. So what's the unmoving mover? One who experiences and delves into everything and doesn't avoid, right? These phrases about the unmoving first mover reminded one of Aristotle, but between Aristotle and the exponents of the perennial philosophy within the great religious traditions, there is a vast difference. Aristotle is primarily concerned with cosmology. The perennial philosophy, or perennial philosophers, are primarily concerned with liberation and enlightenment, here, now. Aristotle is content to know about the unmoving mover from the outside, and theoretically, those are the lawyers, those who live by the letter, those who live by dogma, those who live by practices. Don't get lost in the practices. Use them to experience what those practices are created for. The aim of the perennial philosophers is to become directly aware of it, to know it unitively, so that they and others may actually become the unmoving one. Now we go to 66. A couple people saw this, and then there was a falling away and a focus on dogma and letter and law. Whereas in the East, the Buddhists, right? In Asia, the two parties were tolerant enough to agree to differ. Hinayana spirituality continued to explore the heights within, while the Mahayana masters held up the ideal not of the Arhat, but of the Bodhisattva. Arhat, I think that was the inner contemplative, and pointed the way to spiritual knowledge in its fullness as well as in its heights. So the ideal, then written by Hakuin, saint of the 18th century, Zen saint, okay. Abiding with the non-particular, which is in particulars. Abiding with consciousness, which cannot be, we don't know. We just know, right? And so it's in us, in particulars, right? Going and returning, they remain forever unmoved, taking hold of the non-thought which lies in thoughts. In their every act, they hear the voice of truth. How boundless the sky of contemplation. How transparent the moonlight of the fourfold wisdom, as the truth reveals itself in its eternal tranquility. This very earth is the lotus land of purity, and this body is the body of the Buddha. That sees it this way. That's the idea, right? Lots more stuff. You'll get lost in it, but go ahead and read it. Page 69. Here's a section that's kind of outlined here for me, by me, for me, same thing. In Augustine's language, God alone is to be enjoyed. Creatures are not to be enjoyed, but used with love and compassion and wondering, detached appreciation. What do I see? As means to the knowledge of that which may be enjoyed. Wordsworth, like almost all the other literary nature worshippers, preaches the enjoyment of creatures rather than their use for attainment of spiritual ends, a use which, as we shall see, entails much self-discipline in the user. So as it relates to nature and using the world and to a benefit, not to experience, to join with. Nature, though loved and heeded as a teacher, is only being used as a means to God, not enjoyed as though she were God. The reaction must be a little more strenuous and purposeful. Here, my brother, says an ancient Buddhist author, are the roots of trees. Here are empty places. Meditate. The truth is, of course, that the world is only for those who have deserved it, for in Philo's words, even though a man may be incapable of making himself worthy of the creator of the cosmos. Yeah, don't do that. You can't make yourself worthy. You can't do anything to get it. You already have it. You already are it. Yet he ought to try to make himself worthy of the cosmos. A little bit of a paradox, right? He ought to transform himself from being a man into the nature of the cosmos and become, if one may say so, a little cosmos for those who have not deserved the world either by making themselves worthy of its creator, that is to say, by non-attachment and a total self-nodding, let the ego go, or less arduously, by making themselves worthy of the cosmos by bringing order and a measure of unity to the manifold confusion and of undisciplined human personality. The world is, spiritually speaking, a very dangerous place. So what do we mean by this? Practice where you're at, otherwise to do otherwise is to court disaster. That nirvana and samsara are one is a fact about which the nature of the universe is a fact about the nature of the universe. It's true, yeah. But it is a fact which cannot be fully realized or directly experienced except by souls far advanced in spirituality. For ordinary, nice, unregenerate people to accept this truth by hearsay, not experience, and to act upon it in practice is merely to court disaster. All the dismal story of antinomianism, do whatever the hell you want. Because I have it, it's there. No. Is there to warn us of what happens when men and women make practical applications of a merely intellectual and unrealized theory that all is God and God is all. And hardly less depressing than the spectacle of antinomianism is that of the earnest, respectable, well-rounded life of good citizens who do their best to live sacramentally but don't in fact have any direct acquaintance with that for which the sacramental activity really stands. So, yes, this is in here. There's Taoism, Buddhism, Christian teachings. So there's some advice here. Father Lalemant's advice to theocentric, to oneness, contemplatives to go out and act in the world, since their actions are the only ones capable of doing any real good in the world or to the world. But what neither Dr. Oman or Canon Ray make sufficiently clear is that the nature and grace, samsara and nirvana, perpetual perishing and eternity, are really and experientially only two persons who have fulfilled certain conditions. Only when you have learned the indefinitely difficult art of loving God with all your mind and heart and your neighbor as yourself. If you haven't learned this lesson, you will either be an antinomian eccentric or criminal, or else a respectable, well-rounded lifer who has left himself no time to understand nature or grace. So, how do you do that? How do you do that, right? He must make a total denial of selfhood, submit to complete and absolute mortification. At one period of his career, the Jesus himself seems to have undertaken austerities not merely of the mind, but of the body. There is the record of his 40 days fast, and his statement evidently drawn from personal experience that some demons cannot be cast out, except by those who have fasted much as well as prayed, losing the attachment to small self, to ego, to the default mode network, the way of simply being like just self-centered. So he did this, as many others have done, and they come back, and for Jesus, the Pharisees reproached Jesus because he came eating and drinking and associated with publicans and sinners. They ignored or were unaware of the fact that this apparently worldly prophet had at one time rivaled the physical austerity of John the Baptist and was practicing the spiritual mortifications which he consistently preached. What does this mean? The pattern of Jesus' life is essentially similar to that of the ideal sage, whose career is traced in the ox herding pictures. It's a very good one. I like it. There's a following how an experience of taming the wild ox. It's the ego, the self. So popular among Zen Buddhists, the wild ox, symbolizing the unregenerate self, is caught, made to change its direction, then tamed and gradually transformed from black to white. Regeneration goes so far that for a time the ox is completely lost, so that nothing remains to be pictured but the full-orbed moon, symbolizing mind, suchness, the ground. But don't stop there, right? This is not the final stage. In the end, the herdsman comes back to the world of men, riding on the back of his ox, because he now loves. Loves to the extent of being identified with the divine object of his love. He can do what he likes, for what he likes is what the nature of things likes. And so that is the stark difference between antinomianism, no law, no rule, pure chaos, do whatever you'd like. First, make sure that you are what nature is, the nature of things is. He is found in company with wine bibbers and butchers, and they are converted into Buddhists. For him, there is complete reconciliation to the evanescence, and through that reconciliation, revelation of the eternal. But for nice, ordinary, unregenerate people, the only reconciliation to the evanescence is that of indulged passions, of distractions submitted to and enjoyed. To tell such persons that evanescence and eternity are the same, and not immediately to qualify the statement, is positively fatal, for in practice they are not the same, except to the saint. So, as always, the path of spirituality is a knife edge between abysses. On the one side is the danger of mere rejection and escape. On the other, the danger of mere acceptance and the enjoyment of things which should be used, only be used as instruments or symbols. The disciplining of the will must have as accompaniment a no less thorough disciplining of the consciousness. There has to be a conversion, sudden or otherwise, not merely of the heart, but also of the senses and the perceiving mind. A metanoia, as the Greeks called it, a change of mind. A metanoia is like a spiritual awakening, a realization of consciousness. The result of this discrimination is a more or less sudden, complete revulsion of consciousness and the realization of a state of no mind, which may be described as the freedom from perceptual and intellectual attachment to the ego principle. So the revulsion is to the ego principle because it's separation, it's loneliness, it's pain, it's suffering, it's alone. There's no connection. The state of no mind exists as it were, on a knife edge between the carelessness of the average central man and the strained over-eagerness of the zealot for salvation. To achieve it, one must walk delicately, and to maintain it, must learn to combine the most intense alertness with a tranquil and self-denying passivity. Alert passivity. It's in here somewhere, but it's one of my favorite ways of saying this, that Huxley says, alert passivity. The most intense alertness with a tranquil and self-denying passivity, the most indomitable determination with a perfect submission to the leadings of the spirit. When no mind is sought after by a mind, says Hengpo, that is making it a particular object of thought. There is only testimony of silence. It goes beyond thinking. In other words, we as separate individuals must not try to think it, but rather permit ourselves to be thought by it. Let's pause there.